he was very smart about his defenses. I think he approaches the game as trying to dissect his opponents and try to find weaknesses or try to force them to do things that they didn't feel comfortable doing, and he introduced certain tricks to make me, expand on my talents as an offensive player. I mean, that's why I consider him the best.
Michael Jordan. The name alone represents dominance, perfection, a player who made an entire generation feel like the game was already decided before it even began. Night after night, defenders tried everything. Double teams, physical defense, mind games, and still, Jordan found a way to win. But even at that level, even for someone like Michael Jordan, there were rare moments when things didn't come easy. Moments where the game slowed down, where every shot was contested, where every possession felt like a battle, not just against any players, but against a select few who, in their own way, managed to disrupt his rhythm, challenge his mentality, and push him further than anyone else. These weren't just good defenders, and this wasn't just about scoring less points. This was about players who forced Jordan into uncomfortable games, who made him adjust, rethink, and sometimes struggle. And one of them didn't just challenge Jordan in a series, he forced him into one of the toughest final stretches of his entire career. So today, we're looking at the only 6 players who ever made Michael Jordan struggle, not by stopping him completely, because no one ever truly could, but by making life as difficult as it had ever been for the greatest player of all time, Reggie Miller. Reggie Miller was never the kind of player who overwhelmed you with physicality or defense. He didn't look intimidating, and he wasn't built like the typical superstar of his era. But what made him dangerous was something far more rare, absolute fearlessness in the biggest moments, and a confidence that never dropped, no matter who was standing in front of him. And when that opponent was Michael Jordan, Miller didn't try to survive the game, he tried to take it over. Their battles reached a peak in the late 90s, especially during the 1998 Eastern Conference Finals, when the Indiana Pacers pushed Chicago further than almost anyone during Jordan's second three-peat. This wasn't a series where Jordan could settle into rhythm early and control the pace. Every game stayed close, every possession mattered, and a big reason for that was Miller constantly answering him on the other end. In Game 4, with the series already tight, Miller delivered one of the most controversial and clutch moments of that run, creating separation with a subtle push-off and knocking down the game-winning shot that tied the series 2-2. That moment didn't just win Indiana the game, it shifted pressure onto Jordan in a way that almost never happened during his championship runs. Jordan still put up his numbers, averaging over 30 points in the series, but it didn't come with the usual flow. His efficiency dipped, the games dragged deeper into clutch situations, and instead of finishing teams early, he was forced to respond over and over again. Miller's constant movement without the ball, his ability to hit from deep range, and his willingness to take and make shots in high-pressure moments meant Jordan could never fully dictate the game. He had to stay locked in on both ends, knowing that even a small lapse could turn into a momentum swing. What made this matchup unique wasn't that Miller stopped Jordan, because no one truly did, but that he changed the nature of the game. Instead of Jordan dominating from start to finish, these games became battles of execution and nerve, where every possession carried weight. And for one of the few times in his career, Jordan wasn't just imposing his will, he was being pushed to match someone else's.
This is my first All-Star game in 1990, and I'm a California kid, Riverside, California, and going to Indiana was a shocker. But I wanted to make sure for my first All-Star game, I made a splash in those jeans.
Dennis Rodman. Dennis Rodman was nothing like a traditional defender. He didn't rely on textbook positioning or clean fundamentals. His game was built on chaos, physicality, and an ability to get under your skin in ways that went far beyond basketball. Before he ever became teammates with Michael Jordan in Chicago, Rodman was one of the key pieces of the Detroit Pistons teams that made life miserable for him, both physically and mentally. In the late 1980s, especially during the 1989 and 1990 playoff battles, Rodman was part of a defensive system designed specifically to break Jordan's rhythm. While players like Isiah Thomas led the team, it was Rodman's versatility that allowed Detroit to throw different looks at Jordan without losing intensity. There were stretches in those series where Rodman would take the assignment directly, using his strength, quick hands, and relentless energy to crowd Jordan's space and force him into uncomfortable shots. Jordan still scored, he always did, but it wasn't clean, and it wasn't easy. What made Rodman different was how he attacked every possession. He didn't just contest shots, he disrupted timing. He bumped Jordan off his spots, fought through screens, and stayed attached to him in ways that made every catch feel like a struggle. In multiple games during those playoff series, Jordan was forced into lower shooting percentages than usual, not because he lacked ability, but because every move required extra effort. Even getting to his favorite mid-range areas became a battle, and then there was the mental side. Rodman constantly talked, constantly provoked, constantly pushed the edge of what was allowed. Against most players, that kind of pressure could break focus. With Jordan, it didn't break him, but it forced him to stay locked in at an even higher level. There was no relaxing, no coasting through stretches of the game. Every second Rodman was on the floor, Jordan had to fight for position, fight for space, and fight to maintain control. Rodman didn't shut Michael Jordan down, but during those Detroit years, he was one of the few players who made every possession feel like a physical and mental war. And that kind of resistance, over the course of an entire series, was enough to make even Jordan's greatness look like a grind rather than dominance.
I guess that people are making it very difficult for me to walk on the basketball floor, even hold my head up high, because everyone wants to downgrade Dennis Rodman and make him look like he's a fool, he's an idiot. So
Hakeem Olajuwon. Hakeem Olajuwon wasn't just a dominant big man. He was one of the most complete players the game has ever seen, combining elite footwork, defensive intelligence, and scoring versatility in a way that very few centers ever could. And while he didn't face Michael Jordan in the NBA Finals, his presence during that era created one of the most talked-about what-if matchups in basketball history, because stylistically, he represented something the Chicago Bulls were never fully built to handle. In the early 90s, when Jordan briefly stepped away from the game, Olajuwon took over the league, leading the Houston Rockets to back-to-back championships in 1994 and 1995. During that stretch, he dominated elite competition, including players like Patrick Ewing and David Robinson, exposing weaknesses in teams that relied heavily on interior defense. What made Hakeem different was that he wasn't just powerful, he was unpredictable. His footwork in the post, known as the dream shake, allowed him to create space against any defender, and once he found rhythm, he was almost impossible to read. For Jordan and the Bulls, the challenge wasn't about guarding Olajuwon one-on-one, it was about the structural mismatch he created. Chicago's system was built around perimeter dominance, quick rotations, and defensive pressure on guards and wings. But against a player like Hakeem, that system would have been tested in a completely different way. He could score efficiently in the post, draw double teams, and still find open teammates, forcing defenses to collapse in ways that disrupted their entire identity. Even in regular season matchups, Olajuwon's impact was clear. He could control the paint on both ends, protect the rim, and make every drive a risk. That meant Jordan, who thrived on attacking and finishing, had to adjust his approach, relying more on mid-range shooting and perimeter play instead of constant drives to the basket. It didn't stop Jordan from being effective, but it changed the way he had to operate. Hakeem Olajuwon didn't have a long playoff rivalry with Michael Jordan, but his dominance during that era and the unique matchup he presented made him one of the few players who could truly challenge the Bulls at their peak, not by stopping Jordan directly, but by forcing the entire system around him to adapt. And that alone was enough to make things far more difficult than usual.
The way he communicates with the players in the pros, because most of the pros there's a lot of egos, but there's the way he communicated, the respect they give to him. So when he took that job, I knew that it was the right guy to turn down the program.
Isiah Thomas. Isiah Thomas was never the biggest player on the court, but he was the leader of one of the most ruthless teams in NBA history, the Detroit Pistons. What made him special wasn't just his scoring or playmaking, it was his control over the game and the mentality he brought into every matchup. Against Michael Jordan, that mentality turned into a full-scale war, where every possession carried physical and emotional weight. By the late 1980s, Jordan was already putting up incredible numbers, but he kept running into the same wall in the playoffs, the Pistons, and at the center of that wall was Isiah Thomas, orchestrating everything. In the 1988, 1989, and 1990 playoff series, Detroit didn't just defend Jordan, they built an entire system around stopping him. The Jordan rules were designed to force him into crowded spaces, cut off driving lanes, and turn every attack into contact. But it wasn't just strategy, it was execution, and Isiah was the one controlling the tempo on the other end. In the 1989 Eastern Conference Finals, Chicago was swept. Jordan still scored, but his efficiency dropped, and more importantly, the game was taken out of his control. Every time he attacked, multiple defenders were waiting. Every time he tried to create momentum, Detroit responded with physical defense and disciplined rotations. And while players like Dumars and Rodman were key defensively, it was Isiah Thomas who made sure the Pistons capitalized offensively, keeping constant pressure on Chicago. What made Isiah especially difficult for Jordan wasn't just what happened during plays, it was what happened between them. There was a clear personal edge to this rivalry. Thomas didn't back down, didn't show respect, and never allowed Jordan to feel comfortable, even when he was clearly the better individual player. That tension carried into every game, making the battles more intense and more draining. Jordan eventually overcame the Pistons, but it took years of adjustments, physically getting stronger, mentally becoming tougher, and waiting for the right moment to break through. Before that happened, Isiah Thomas and those Detroit teams forced Jordan into some of the most difficult playoff series of his career, not because they could outscore him, but because they made every single step toward winning feel like a fight.
You know, whether it be Apple, AT&T, you know, the things you need, you know, the bread and butter.
Absolutely.
That, and the food that comes to the table, that's what I invest in.
Yeah.
You know, the things that you use every single day, those are the things that I invest in.
Joe Dumars. Joe Dumars didn't play with the same loud intensity as his Pistons teammates, and he didn't rely on trash talk or physical intimidation to make his presence felt. But what he brought instead was something far more difficult to deal with: discipline, precision, and defensive intelligence that rarely broke down. And against Michael Jordan, that made him one of the most effective individual defenders Jordan ever faced. During the late 1980s, especially in the 1989 Eastern Conference Finals, Dumars was often given the primary responsibility of guarding Jordan one-on-one within Detroit's larger defensive scheme. While the Jordan rules involved help defense and physical rotations, Dumars' role was different. He had to stay in front, contest without fouling, and force Jordan into taking tougher, less comfortable shots. And for stretches of that series, he did exactly that. Jordan still produced, but the efficiency wasn't there in the same way. Dumars' footwork allowed him to stay balanced against Jordan's quick first step, and his timing made it difficult for Jordan to get clean looks in his preferred spots. Instead of explosive drives and smooth mid-range pull-ups, possessions became slower, more contested, and more predictable. That subtle disruption added up over the course of games, and over the course of the series. What separated Dumars from most defenders was consistency. He didn't gamble, he didn't overcommit, and he rarely gave Jordan easy opportunities. Even when help defenders weren't immediately in position, Dumars could hold his ground just long enough to force Jordan into adjusting mid-play. That kind of control is rare against a player who thrived on improvisation. Jordan himself later acknowledged Dumars as one of the toughest defenders he ever faced, which says everything about the impact he had. Because while others relied on physicality or aggression, Dumars relied on discipline, and that discipline was enough to turn even Jordan's greatest strengths into a challenge.
Main thing during that time is not to get discouraged, not get down, because he's going to make some shots. And, you know, I try not to show any emotion towards him. You know, just keep coming at him, and on the other end, I tried to neutralize it by hitting some shots myself.
Gary Payton. Gary Payton wasn't just a great defender. He was one of the few players who brought defense, intensity, and nonstop mental pressure together on every single possession. Nicknamed the Glove for a reason, Payton had the ability to stay attached to his opponent, cut off angles, and make even elite scorers uncomfortable. And when he was matched up with Michael Jordan, that impact became impossible to ignore. Their most defining battle came in the 1996 NBA Finals between the Seattle Supersonics and the Chicago Bulls. Early in the series, Payton wasn't assigned to Jordan as the primary defender, and Chicago took control quickly, going up 3-0. But once Seattle made the adjustment and put Payton directly on Jordan, starting in Game 4, the tone of the series changed immediately. From that point on, Jordan's efficiency dropped significantly. Over Games 4 through 6, he shot around 36% from the field, one of the lowest stretches of his finals career. It wasn't that Jordan stopped scoring entirely. He still found ways to contribute, but the ease was gone. Every catch was pressured, every dribble was contested, and every shot felt forced. Payton didn't just rely on physical defense. He crowded Jordan's space, used his strength to absorb contact, and stayed active with his hands without constantly fouling. At the same time, he brought relentless energy and constant communication, making sure Jordan felt his presence on every possession. There were no breaks, no easy sequences where Jordan could settle into rhythm. Games that usually would have been controlled by Chicago turned into tighter contests. Seattle extended the series to 6 games, something that seemed unlikely after the first 3. And a big reason for that shift was Payton's ability to disrupt Jordan's flow in a way very few defenders ever had. Gary Payton didn't stop Michael Jordan from winning that championship. But for a stretch in that final series, he did something extremely rare. He made Jordan look uncomfortable, inefficient, and human.
We were like saying if you get gonorrhea, chlamydia, whatever. You know what I'm saying? You get that. All we got to do is just go take a pill or get a shot.
Yeah.
This wasn't like that. You know what I'm saying? So we had to be understanding with that, but it was just a thing that you grow up, you ain't had that many women that was going to say you was fine or nothing like that. It was just that type of situation.
Money makes you handsome.
Yeah. And when you get a bad one, and it keep getting bad ones, you was like, man, I can't turn that down. You know what I'm saying? It's like you can't turn it down. Right. So it is what it is, and we were like that.